Florida State versus LSU is a Sunday night game. For those of you who didn't know, this is a 7:30 Eastern Time kickoff on ESPN. It is for this reason that we're starting our Sunday night show at 6:30 Eastern, 5:30 Central. So just keep that in mind. Brian Kelly is the head coach at LSU. Now, for those of you who have stuck with us, who live the no off-season life, you know that. I think most people know it, but there's an entire sea of people out there who don't come back to the college football table until August. So this is still a new concept to them. And then none of us have seen him coach a game in purple and gold. So we finally get to see that in the Superdome, a neutral site, I'm told, the Superdome in Louisiana. And we get to see probably Jaden Daniels at quarterback for LSU. Now, Brian Kelly is playing it close to the vest or close to the chest, as some of my buddies would say. But we think, and we have for a couple of weeks thought, that Jaden Daniels is going to get the first look at quarterback there. And that has been backed up by pretty much everyone I've talked to around the program. So here's what we need to watch in this game. If you could just tell me one thing, and that one thing was, how will LSU's defensive line match up against this offensive line of FSU? If you could just tell me that, if you could confirm my suspicion there, I probably wouldn't even need to watch the game. It is my belief that offensive line is the biggest, bright, blinking red light on this FSU team. Fan base knows it. This is no mystery, but if you haven't been following FSU closely, they've had some injury, misfortune, I guess, especially on the interior. And there is the presence of guys like Mason Smith at LSU, for example, a guy who's versatile enough and supremely talented enough to just shift all around on that front like some of these Clemson guys have been able to do in the past, that you could reach a critical mass of unblockability, shall we say, Sunday night to where the game is wrecked. And that's a risk that Florida State runs. Now, there are ways to window dress your way around that, but the bottom line is, if you're continually dealing with surge up the middle offensively, there's really no page in your playbook that accounts for that. The lines on those routes, they get really zigzag because you got to cut them off early because your receivers don't have adequate time to even complete their square ins and square outs and post. And so it could get a little sideways. So that's the first thing. If you could just tell me that, I wouldn't need to go through the rest of the breakdown. The most basic reason why Florida State could end up winning this, though, is the reason. So it sounds kind of commonsensical, but if you think about it, there's no one player. Sometimes when you do breakdowns or you're trying to bet a game, you're trying to look for this one edge and you're trying to look for this one guy that's going to be the reason. FSU is going to win because of, and then there's one name in the blank and it sounds really good. It's like a fortune cookie. It's like bumper sticker logic. I don't know that Florida State has that. But what they could have in the aggregate is enough small gains just through continual progression, slow progression, but progression under Mike Norvell, they could have enough that the incremental gains add up in the aggregate to a good enough product to where the team's just flat out better than you thought they'd be. It's no one guy. There's not one guy or one position group that's gotten 35% better than last year. They're just a little bit better and a little bit better because that's what they've done every year under him so far. And if that has started to maybe scale just a little bit, there's a little bit steeper slope to the progression, this is the kind of game where it could show up. The line's 3. LSU's favored by 3 in Louisiana. So there are holes on this LSU team too. We don't know if they're going to be able to run the ball. No one in Louisiana knows if they're going to be able to run the ball. No one knows fully what to expect at quarterback. Think you got a good one? Think you got a really good stable of receivers? Speaking of those receivers, that is the other potentially glaring mismatch here, if there are mismatches. The first one's that LSU defensive line against a vulnerable, to say the least, FSU offensive front. The other one is this stable of receivers for LSU could really go to work Sunday night. And these are two factors that do not lend a ton of confidence to me backing Florida State. But you do have to keep in mind, this could just as easily be an argument made the other way around. LSU's starting a true freshman at left tackle. He's a really good one. His name's Will Campbell. And they feel so good about him, he's kind of been entrenched during camp, and they've been able to work some guys elsewhere and cross-train here and cross-train there. So, listen, this could be just an immediate plug-and-play. We see him every few years. Bama's had several of them. LSU may have one in Will Campbell. But you still have a true freshman there. So, at the very least, Jared Verse, for example, is a transfer that Florida State thinks they hit the lottery on. he'll match up against Campbell, probably a fair amount Sunday night. What if there's vulnerability there? What if that's the matchup advantage up front that maybe you don't quite see coming in, that leads to a blindside strip sack, that leads to maybe a +1 or +2 turnover margin for Florida State over the span of 4 quarters, and that's how they win a 26-23 ball game? That's in the cards. We're just trying to play percentages here and figure out what's more likely. So let's take a look at the model. You see what Vegas thinks, LSU -3. As you know, because I gave this out last week, LSU is one of our Ramen Noodle Express best bets. As much as I try to paint the scenario for you, when I think about the line of scrimmage advantage for LSU's defensive line, and when I think about the potential perimeter advantage for LSU's wide receivers, I think that they're going to stretch it a little bit. And so we're taking LSU to win. We're taking them to cover. The model has LSU -6. So there's a little bit of margin difference here between our model's thinking and the Vegas thinking. And we are therefore going to not only take LSU to win and cover, that's one of our best bets of the week. So give us the Tigers a happy start for the Brian Kelly era.